By the way, do you know that in 2015, about 62 million uh, volunteered themselves. They provided services in form of volunteer work, and that translates to 8 billion hours of unpaid services. Welcome. This is Marketplace Believers, an online platform that engages, equips, and encourages believers to say inawezekana. Please, we encourage you to go to our YouTube channel, that is Marketplace Believers. Marketplace Media. Hit the subscriber button so that we can be able, every time when YouTube uploads a new video, you can be notified. This is a online class, and if you are there, we encourage you to pick your notes, your notebook, so that you can be able to learn that which we'll be learning. And we continue with leadership lessons from New Testaments. Today we shall do recruiting volunteers. Recruiting volunteers. If you allow us, we can read that from the book of Acts chapter. Let's do the book of Acts. The book of Acts chapter 15, verse number 32. We'll go up to verse number 35. So let's read together, please. So we go. Judas and Silas were prophets, and they spoke a long time, encouraging and helping the Lord's followers. The men from Jerusalem stayed in Antioch for a while, and when they left to return to the ones who had sent them, the followers wished them well. But Paul and Barnabas stayed in Antioch, where they and many others taught and preached about the Lord. Now, sometime later, Paul said to Barnabas, "Let's go back to visit the Lord followers in the cities where we preach this message and know how they are going." And then let's go to verse 37. Paul and Barnabas took along John, whose other name was Mark. This is a very important passage that we've read. And before we jump into it, we need to say that somebody called Audrey Hepburn actually said, as you grow older, you will discover that you have two hands. As you grow older, you will discover that you have two hands, one for helping yourself and another for helping others. Do you know that in 2015, like we've said, over 62 million people provided non-profits with their time in form of volunteer work, and that translates to about 8 billion hours of unpaid services. And so it follows that volunteering is when you go out there and ask people to work without a pay. Now, this can be done either formally or it can be done formally, formally or informally, and it can be for a short time or for a long time. Now, we need to say that when it comes to volunteer work, then it is a big time challenge. Even big organization, successful organization like United Nations have a challenge when it comes to recruiting, when it comes to retaining volunteer work. Now, the goal of every non-profit organization is twofold. Like we've said, is number one, to attract, you want to attract followers, but at the same time, you also want to retain volunteers. And as we have said, it is not a very easy thing. It is very challenging, but again, it is practical. Okay? We need to understand that. Now, we need to say that organizations that have volunteers that are non-profit, we need to say that organizations that are non-profit actually needs a lot of leadership if there is a leadership that is actually required, then it is when one is leading volunteer, non-profit organizations, because you need to remember that volunteers are not paid anything. Actually, it is their willingness that makes them to come and volunteer, and whatever that keeps them there is when the vision is still appealing to them. Remember, organizations such as non-profits never give any salary. There's no retirement packages. There's no perks that are given. And so they require a lot of leadership. You need to realize that the recruitment of non-volunteers is an ongoing kind of a staff. And then we need also to say that it is almost impossible to retain 100% of volunteers, because some will move away, some will have changes, some will simply lose interest. And so it is impossible to retain 100% of recruitment. Now, we need to ask a question today, and the question that we need to ask ourselves is, why do members volunteer themselves? Why are members, interested in joining a volunteer venture? We'll list 5 of them. Number 1, people will join or people will volunteer when it's a meaningful opportunity, when the opportunity gives members an opportunity to make a difference, when the recruitment drive is about to make a meaningful difference, to bring a contribution, to make a difference, to add value, to make an impact. When the opportunity brings meaning, when people feel that they are going to be making a huge difference in the lives of people, add value to people, then people will definitely volunteer. Number 2, when members or the volunteers feel that they have the right skills. No one wants to volunteer to a venture where he feels or she feels that he doesn't have the right skills to do the job that is available. And so if the volunteer work is about ICT work, if it's about legal aid, if it's about maybe landscaping, if it's about building, if it's about plumbing, if it's about electrical engineering, when the job opportunity, when the volunteer opportunity matches the skills, the gifting, the talents, the abilities that are being required, then people will definitely volunteer. If you ask somebody to volunteer for ICT work and they don't have the skills, they don't have the capacity, they do not have the gifting, they are not wired alongside Number 3, when the people will volunteer when it is accessible to them. Now, accessibility is very, very important. Of course, you realize that volunteers are constrained by time, and especially when they are constrained by time or by they are disadvantaged by geographical location of the volunteer services, then they are unlikely to volunteer themselves. And so when accessibility, a geographical location matches the volunteers, then they are likely to say yes. Because of course, a volunteer will weigh the cost of helping, and it will not just be in terms of time. People will look at cost like transportation, the child, and other, and time that they will invest into it. And then finally, another reason why people will volunteer is when it is on short time assignment. When people are being asked to volunteer themselves for a short time assignment, then you can be assured that they only know it's going to take a month, it's going to take a week, it's going to take an hour, it's going to take a year, it's going to take just a short time. So people will volunteer. On the reverse side, there are reasons why people fail to volunteer. When you look at Paul, he had some volunteers, and we've already been seeing them, one being John Mark. And it is very important for us to realize that at one point John Mark fell off and did not continue with the volunteering work. So we ask ourselves, why is it that people fail to volunteer? Why is it that people fail to volunteer themselves? Because understanding these reasons will help us to be able to understand why we are not able to retain volunteers. Number one, we will list 14 reasons why volunteers don't show up or why they quit. Number one is when we fail to ask them to volunteer. When we don't ask, then people are not going to answer. And so the number one reason that is cited why volunteers don't show up is because they are not being asked. And so this is a big time lesson for pastors, for those leaders that are leading non-profit organizations. If you don't ask people to volunteer themselves, then you can be assured that they are not going to volunteer themselves. Number two, the reason is when the volunteers feel that they are untrained, they are ill-equipped, or ungifted. When they feel untrained, or ill-gifted, they don't feel like they have the skills to do that which they have been asked to do. Like, assume that it's a motor garage and is looking for volunteers who can offer free mechanical services, or assume is a church that wants to do free dental services. If somebody does not have those skills, then of course such somebody cannot volunteer. Thirdly, people will not volunteer when the information is not given, is not shared. So lack of information about volunteer opportunities, if those opportunities are not made public, then you can be assured that people will not volunteer themselves. Number four is when people will not volunteer themselves when they are preoccupied with their personal agenda, and generally they are busy. When people, and this happens especially in church, where people are preoccupied, their diaries are filled, their calendars are filled with activities, they don't have space to do that which they have been asked to do. So somebody will not volunteer to teach Sunday school, somebody will not volunteer to speak in a men's conference, especially if the space and time is not available. Number five, people will fail to volunteer when there is lack of follow through. And when you make the recruitment drive, when you make the information that you're looking for volunteers, when you fail to follow through with a phone, with a telephone call, with a message, with a letter, it just shows that you don't have the interest. And so when people volunteer, they need to follow them up. Number six, very interesting, is when there is an inadequate expense reimbursement. When the volunteers are not, their expenses for volunteering is not made, or when it is inadequate. It is very, very important that when the volunteer recruitment drive is being done, it is very important for the recruiter to be able to tell the volunteers that this is pro bono. It is completely free. There is no reimbursement. You just need to volunteer yourself, your blood, your time, and your everything. But when there is a promise that we are going to meet the cost, we are going to meet your traveling cost, we're going to meet your hotel expenses, then they need to be adequate. Okay, that needs to be said upfront. Number seven, why people fail to volunteer is that when they have fear of responsibility. When people look at the volunteer opportunity, when they look at the magnitude, the task, the size of the responsibility, when the task seems to be so high, when seems like it is demanding a lot of time and energy, people will fail to volunteer. And it is very important for the recruiter, for the person who is conducting the recruitment, to be able to say in black and white what is it that the volunteer is required to give. Number 8, they suffer from past burnout. There are those in every non-profit organizations, there are two types of people. There is what we call the pillars. The pillars are the people who are like the founders, the people who poured their sweat and blood and time and resources in making the organization to stand. Whether we are talking about a church, whether we are talking about a non-profit organization, be it the Red Cross, or whether we are talking about a business, there are those people who are the pillars, who actually were the foundation that actually made the organization to continue going on. Now, but again, there are also the pew sitters. The pew sitters, PEW, the pew sitters, these are people who feel that they don't need to give a lot. They just need to rest and be fed. And this, it is very easy for Rapira to transit to a pew sitter. And this normally happens when the leadership actually takes them for granted and does not actually appreciate them publicly for the work that they have done. And so it simply means that a leader needs to constantly heap on praise on people, especially when you're leading an organization of volunteers. Okay, and because once you don't appreciate them, they suffer from burnout. Number 9, people will fail to volunteer when they are intimidated by the present workers. Appear somebody who have stuck, somebody who have given their blood and sweat, sometimes, when we've seen it, are unwilling to take in fresh ideas, especially from those people, especially ideas that will make them redundant, or will make them idle, or will make them jobless. They will not do it, especially when they remember the sacrifice that they have put into them. And so it is very important when you're introducing new changes that you do not render volunteers jobless. Okay, and for volunteers to accept fresh ideas, they will require high level maturity. They will require high level form of security to be able to embrace the new ideas. Number 10, a work is not meaningful when the kind of engagement that they are called unto do is not meaningful. It doesn't not make sense to them. It doesn't appeal to them. It doesn't make them feel important. Number 11, when they are ignorant about of the biblical paradigm for ministry. Now, the paradigm shift for ministry is servanthood. Ministry is not a paid kind of service, and it is very important, especially even for those that are in full-time ministry. It is very important for us to understand that ministry is not a paid kind of a staff. Because, for example, if you take a pastor, how much can you pay a pastor who wakes up at 3 a.m. and prays for the members for like 3 hours? How much would you pay a pastor who picks up the list of her members and calls each one and spends a long time praying with them and encouraging them? How much time would you pay a pastor who travels several kilometers to go and pray for a sick member, for a sick believer? So there is the need to understand that ministry is not a paid up kind of an activity. You cannot be able to reimburse the energy, the commitment that is put, especially in pastoral work. Now, number that 12 is that when they are, and I think we said this, is when they are unaware of the options available. Most leaders assume that, especially in church, this, and I've seen this in church, When we assume as church leaders that people are perfectly aware of the opportunities that are available. And it is very important for the church leaders, for the non-profit organizations leaders to be able to make it a public that the opportunities are available. There's opportunity for a Sunday school teacher. There's an opportunity to for music department. There's opportunity in fixing meals for the church leaders. Those things needs to be made available. And then number 13 is when volunteers do not own the cause. And this means that the leader needs to paint. He needs to paint the opportunities in a way that actually inspires. He needs to say it so that the buy-in power is greater. Remember, people will never give you the hand. People will never give you their hand if they are before they give you their mind. People will never give their hand if you have not appealed to their mind. And so it is very important for you to be able to pitch up, in an appealing way, in a clear way, in a convincing way, such that people will feel convinced, they will feel persuaded to be able to join your cause. Very, very important. And then number 14, why people are volunteering is tough, is because some people are simply selfish, they are lazy and indifferent. And it is simply happens when you ask people to join a cause, when you are asking people to support you, when you are asking people to donate to a certain cause. Some people are simply selfish, they are lazy, they are indifferent, and they will say, I don't care. I let them do whatever it is. I am not giving a dime. I'm not giving a coin of my money. I'm not wasting my time for such a cause like that. So you might be asking, if those are the reasons that make people not to join, then how can I recruit and how can I retain volunteers? Very, very important question. So allow us in a minute or two to share seven ways, seven creative reasons, or ways on how we can recruit and retain what we call volunteers. We need to understand that many volunteers struggle to find. Many non-profit organizations actually struggle to find volunteers because they lack creativity in their recruitment efforts. And so we propose the following 7 ways in which you can be able to attract and retain volunteers. Number 1, you need to create time. You need to create time to meet new people. Create time to meet new people out there and pitch a communication. Deliberately talk to them about those ministry, those volunteer opportunities, and whether it means going on social media, whether it means going to churches and calling them, whether it means organizing breakfast meetings, so that you can be able to do it. That is very, very important. You just need to be intentional to meeting people. Remember, if you don't become intentional in meeting people, there is no any other way that people are going to know. So whatever it is, be intentional and meet with people and tell them after you tell them it is that are available. Number 2, you need to offer training for every position. Once the recruiters come on board, it is very, very important for you to be able to train them, to show them, to teach them how whatever it is that you are asking them to do, how it is done. Remember, during the recruitment drive, you are simply telling them why they need to be recruited, why they need to be enlisted. And once they join, you need to teach them how they can offer their services. Even when the ones that have joined are are experts, even when they have the expertise, even when they have the capacity, you really need to explain how they will volunteer in terms of modalities. You need to go to modus operandi and be able to explain how they are going to volunteer themselves. And you need to do it very clearly. They need to understand the parameters. They need to understand the boundaries. They need to understand how much time, how much effort, how much resources, that, and for how long will they offer their services. Number 3, we are saying you need to constantly publicize available ministry options. In other words, you need to be going out there. Recruitment drives need to continue. They do not need to be done, especially when there are no volunteers. You need to continue doing it. People need to know constantly that there are ministry opportunities that needs to be done. And as we have said, you need to go and teach and encourage, especially in church, in religious circles. You need to teach the priesthood of every believer. You need to explain that in this church, in this charity organization, every person have a part to pray. That it does not only encourage so and so, but every person has a part to pray. You need to say that you have a gift, you have a talent, you have a capacity in which you can be able to bring on board. And now, number 5, you need to develop a realistic commitment for the people, to share the Lord. In other words, people need to have, they need to understand that this is the amount of commitment that you are asking from them. You really do not need to ask them to give something that is unrealistic. You really need to be realistic. When Jesus Christ recruited his 12 disciples, he shared the commitment up front. He said, you must be ready to hate your mother and father. You must carry the cross. You must be willing to be rejected. You must be willing to be hated. And so it is very, very important to put a realistic commitment to the people and do it up front. Okay. Number 6, you need to foster an atmosphere of thankfulness, an atmosphere of gratitude. In other words, you need to do it constantly. You need to do it publicly. You need to do it genuinely. We are saying you can never say thank you too much. And people that have volunteered, they need to understand that they are appreciated and that their efforts are noticed. And then they need to know that they matter. You need to keep on telling people thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And then finally, you need to honor people. You need to honor volunteers with their time. You need to honor them and you need to honor their time. Remember that volunteers are under no obligation to volunteer to the church, to your charitable organization. No. Leaders who attend and volunteer churches